Alright, so the final poem in the anthology on the list of poems that have to be studied for the A-level is Ode on a Grayson Perry Urn. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just write out the definitions of the following. So you've got key terms there that are used in the poem. So kitschy, so excessively showy or sentimental, linked to poor artistic taste. Burberry is a high-end clothing brand, but cheaper replicas are available and linked to working class culture of the 21st century. Buckfast and Diamond White are cheap wine and cider, commonly associated with antisocial behaviour. And then Donut O's is rotating a car in a tight circle to leave a circular pattern of rubber on the road. So if you can pause and go ahead and write down those definitions. You could put them on the poem as well if you wanted to, just so that you know what those are, but I'm sure you'll know some of those anyway already. Going on to the poem then, so I will do what I usually do. I'll read through it and then we will have a look at breaking it down stanza by stanza and going through then analysing for meaning. Ode on a Grayson Perry Urn. Hello, what's all this here? A kitschy vase some Shirley Temple maniac has knocked out, delineating tales of kids in cars on crap estates, the Burberry-clad louts who flail their motors through the smoky night from Manchester to Motherwell or Slough, creating bedlam on the Queen's Highway. Your gaudy evocation can somehow conjure the scene without including fright, as would a Daily Express expose. Can bring to mind the throaty turbo roar of hatchbacks turned almost to breaking point, the joyful throb of UK garage or the house imported from the continent, and yet educe a sense of peace, of calm, the screech of tyres and the nervous squeals of girls, too young to quite appreciate the peril they are in, are heard, but these wheels will not lose traction, skid and flip, no harm befall these children. They will stay out late forever, pumped on youth and ecstasy, on alloy base and arrogance, and speed the back lanes, the urban gyratory, the wide motorways, never having need to race back home for work next day to bed. Each girl is buff, each geezer toned and strong, charged with pulsing juice, which, even yet, fills every pair of Calvins in each thong, never to be deflated, given head in crude games of chlamydia roulette. Now see who comes to line the sparse grass verge, to toast them in Buckfast and Diamond White. Rat boys and corn-road cheerleaders who urge them on to pull more burnouts or to write their donut O's as signature upon the bleached tarmac of dead suburban streets. Their dogs set up a row and curtains twitch as pensioners and parents telephone the cops to plead for quiet, sue for peace. Tranquility, though, is for the rich. And so, millennia hence, you garish crock, when all context is lost, galleries razed to level dust, and we're long in the box, will future poets look on you amazed, speculate how children might have lived when you were fired, lives so free and bountiful, and there, beneath a sun a little colder, declare, how happy were those creatures then, who knew the truth was all negotiable, and beauty in the gift of the beholder. So, as I usually do, got some questions there. So, having a little think about the inferences that you can make from the title of the poem. And then what I'd like you to have a go at doing is search for Grayson Perry Urn. So, find the one that this poem is referring to and note your understanding of the poem based on your findings. And actually, I'll give you a hint. Hopefully that's enough of a hint to help. How does the poem present young people, and then how does he interpret those of the future viewing the 21st century youth in the artwork? So again, if you can just pause that, get down your own initial thoughts on those questions, and then we'll go through it and we'll analyse it. Alright, a little bit of context really before I dive into the analysis of this properly. But there is an ode that Keats wrote about a Grecian urn. So this is very much almost, not necessarily a parody, but it sort of links to that idea. So Keats wrote an ode to a Grecian urn, one that you can see like in the picture there. So this was from ancient Greece, where obviously there's depictions of young people on the urn, and that's pretty much what's being reflected here as well in this poem. But obviously it's focused on an urn depicting life in 20th and 21st century Britain. So obviously it's slightly different to the one that Keats was writing about. So what we will do now, I will go through the depiction of young people in this urn and this writer's interpretation of it then. So an ode then, so thinking about the title, an ode is a formal poem, and it's got some very not necessarily strict rules with it, but it usually glorifies an event or an individual. Usually, that's usually what an ode is. And a Grayson Perry urn, so that's why I asked you to have a little look at this. So Grayson Perry is an artist, depicts 20th, 21st century life on these vases, on these urns. So there is a sort of contextual understanding required there, but it does make some sense about what this poem is going to be about. It's less ambiguous than some of the other titles that we've looked at. So we start off with almost quite an abrupt introduction here. What's this all about? And that's maybe reflective of maybe a police officer or a sort of comedy show. We've got this sort of interrogative which creates maybe suspense as well. So a kitschy vase, so initial impression then maybe of the urn, and the writer seems to have this quite negative impression. Kitschy suggesting that, you know, it's not very very good taste, that it's not a very nice vase. So Shirley Temple Manique has knocked out. So this link, again, this is almost a contextual link here. So Shirley Temple was a very young, girly, cutesy character, actress, that actually links to Perry there in a very quite negative way, because Grayson Perry, if you've made that Google search, you'll see as well that Grayson Perry does actually like to dress in women's clothing, and does actually wear sort of makeup, and does their hair to reflect more feminine styles. So there is almost quite a derogatory link there that he's making to sort of the dress choices of the artist. And Manique is sort of failed intimation of something, so imitation of something. So failing to kind of actually fully convey the idea of dressing like a female there, and like I said, it's quite a derogatory statement to make about the artist, really, and shouldn't really have any bearing on his artwork. But yet the writer's putting that in as a derogatory dig almost at the artist, has knocked out. And again, sort of very derogatory about it. This idea of knocking out suggests that not much maybe effort or thought has gone into creating that piece of artwork. So delineating, so depicting tales of kids in cars. So again, there is almost like an air of superiority in the way that he's kind of almost looking down at the artist for creating a vase that's depicting sort of young people in cars on crap estates. So we've got here as well the use of that adjective and the fact that it is an expletive. There's almost a lower class status there, and there is an air of superiority here definitely coming from the poet. The Burberry-clad louts, again, very negative connotations. If we're talking about louts, we're talking about, you know, people who are lazy, you know, it's very sort of almost a yobbish idea to them as well, who flail their motors through the smoky night. So you've got this idea of irresponsibility, who flail, so suggesting that they're sort of pushing their cars to the extreme, and therefore not taking responsibility for what they're doing. The smoky night, so maybe a link there again to an industrial link, suggesting lower classes as well. From Manchester to Motherwell to Slough. So these locations actually have quite unappealing reputations, and they're not seen as very high class areas to live in. Creating Bedlam, and Bedlam, there's a link to madness, and that idea of chaos then on the Queen's Highway. So again, social classes coming into it, because it's this idea then that the roads are owned by the Queen. Your gaudy evocation, so this idea again of quite garish, quite crude, so being quite derogatory about this type of artwork that's being produced, somehow conjure the scene. without inducing fright. So here actually we have maybe a little bit of a shift. Produces something maybe more and deeper than something like the newspaper would. So, you know, he's saying, well, this is an awful piece of artwork, but it's better than those kind of tabloid newspapers would depict. So it's almost, again, a backhanded compliment. It's not really being totally positive about this piece of artwork. Can bring to mind the throaty turbo roar. So we've got onomatopoeia here as well, maybe imitating the engine noise. This is where we start to get a sense of the depiction of the youth being seen as quite exuberant and quite energetic, of hatchbacks turned almost to breaking point. So again, we've got this idea of being irresponsible. The joyful throb. So here again, less negative. There's that idea of happiness and connotations of content and being, like I said, happy. Throb of UK garage. So again, sense of maybe energy from the youth as they're sort of listening to these bits of music. And we've got as well here of house imported from the continent. So almost linking to the idea of the cars there, this idea of importing the music from elsewhere, and yet educe a sense of peace, of calm, the screech of tyres, the nervous squeals. So we've got caesura here, so allows the reader to sort of contemplate what's being told to us. The screech of tyres, the nervous squeals, so again this almost like frantic energy that's portrayed on the vase, but it's actually encapsulated in that it's going to be frozen on that forever. Of girls too young to quite appreciate the peril they are in, so this idea as well of peril, you know, meaning extreme danger they are in, but these wheels will not lose traction. So this is where we see this turning point where actually they're frozen in this depiction on the vase, that actually they will never come to harm. Skid and flip, no harm befall these children. So some points here that we can make about this idea of children. So sees them maybe as extremely young, and again it maybe shows a generational divide as well, and he sees that difference between him and them, and he does view them then because they're so young in his eyes that he sees them as children. We've got this caesura then as well, emphasises that frozen nature of these images before sort of carrying on with describing the movement that's displayed and frozen within the depictions on the vase. They will stay out late forever, pumped on youth and ecstasy. It's this idea again of, it's quite colloquial language really, but it's a verb, it's emphasising their energy, that they're pumped up on youth, so that idea of being quite young, maybe carefree, so the connotations that are created with that, and ecstasy. So it's ambiguous there. Could he mean with joy, with happiness, or is there maybe a double entendre suggesting maybe that they're high on drugs? On ally, base and arrogance. So again, that idea that it ties in with the cars, and arrogance, that idea of youth and feeling that, you know, that no harm will come to them. And speed, the back lane. So again, there's that energy, that impulse, the idea of things being fast paced. The back lanes. So again, maybe an idea of there being hidden, and not wanting to sort of be seen. Never having need to race back home for work the next day to bed. So again, this idea maybe of they escape that mundane existence, so they will forever be sort of captured in that moment of exuberance and high energy, and that they've escaped that kind of mundane, the monotony of work and the 9 to 5. Each girl is buff, each geezer toned and strong. So geezer there, quite stereotypical depiction of a man who likes beer, pubs and football. So, you know, geezer quite colloquial there. Buff, toned and strong, we've got a lexical set there, so to suggest that the peak of physical fitness, and that they're very sort of healthy and young. Charged with pulsing juice, so you've got almost like a sense of eroticism there, that idea as well of having quite high sexual energy. Fills every pair of Calvins and each thong. So like I said, a sexual reference there. Never to be deflated, given head in crude games of chlamydia roulette. So again, very sort of stark depiction there of a sexual act. But it again sort of it shows that they will never face the consequences of their sort of wild actions, because they're forever frozen onto that vase. And they're not going to face the sort of the negatives that come with that kind of risky behaviour. On to the last but one stanza. So now see who comes to line the sparse grass verge. So we've got this kind of assonance now that slows down the line and actually maybe depicts how boring these sort of suburban areas that they're sort of hanging out in, how sort of like I said, how boring it is compared to the high energy behaviour and risky behaviour that they're engaging in. To toast, and again quite ironic use there because it's kind of they're taunting these local residents, them in Buckfast and Diamond. So we said this idea of cheap wine, beer, cider, cheap drinks. So rat boys and cornrow cheerleaders. So that's a quite 90s cultural reference. That idea of putting your hair in cornrows was quite popular then as well. So again, very much contextualised to the time that this is set. Cheerleaders who urge them on to pull more burnouts or write their donut O's. So again, that idea of engaging in risky antisocial behaviour. The bleached tarmac. So again, maybe suggesting that the road is drained of colour, how boring again these areas are. Emphasised here as well with dead suburban streets. So those adjectives again almost provide an antithesis between the sort of boring dullness of the areas in comparison to the high energy of the young people. The dogs set up a row and curtains twitch. So again, very stereotypical depiction then of people in the houses, of pensioners and parents who, you know, are seen as then curtain twitchers. The cops. So again, we've got a working class colloquial language to plead for quiet, sue for peace. So it suggests a shift here for culture, again, sort of social class. This idea of the disparity between the higher and lower social classes. Tranquility, though, is for the rich. So suggesting that, you know, the police aren't going to take much notice of them because they're not in an affluent area. We've got a shift here now. So although we have got sort of a shift in terms of moving on to the next stanza, that coordinating conjunction actually does link the sentences. So he's still sort of focused on the same topic, but he's being sort of, I want to say reflective, but it's not necessarily reflective because he's thinking about what people would consider and think about when they see this Grayson Perrier in the future. So just like Keats wrote an ode to a Grecian vase, will at some point, you know, historians and archaeologists in the distant future, when they see these Grayson Perriers and view the youth being depicted in our artwork, is this how they will view them? Is this what they're going to think? And so millennia hence, so interprets what the future archaeologists will think about this artwork. York garish, so again suggesting that it's, you know, vibrant and bright and quite sort of, again, quite crude. Crocs, when all context is lost, galleries raised to level dust, and we're long in the box. So this idea of us, you know, we'll have gone, we won't be around for that anymore, we'll be long gone. Will future poets look on you amazed? So now there's almost a direct shift to addressing the urn, so he's directly addressing the urn. Speculate how children might have lived when you were fired. So, you know, when you were created, when you were put in the kiln to become hardened. Live so free and bountiful. So we've got now a shift. There's like positive adjectives being used to describe these youthful depictions. Attitude is softened maybe towards the youth. It becomes more philosophical. Free and bountiful. And there beneath a sun a little colder. So again, you know, it contextualises it here. Because this idea is that as our sun kind of grows older, it will lose heat and it won't be as hot as it once was. Declare how happy were those creatures then. So the italicised part of this poem links directly to Keats' poem. So it echoes very much what Keats was saying at the end of Ode on a Grecian Urn. So how happy were those creatures. So he does kind of dehumanise depictions of these youthful people who knew the truth was negotiable. So this idea that the truth is not specific, that the truth is dependent on how you interpret it. And beauty is the gift of the beholder. So again, that idea of artwork being subjective, and, you know, you view beauty very differently. So it's almost like at the end here, the poet is choosing to take maybe a more optimistic view of the vase and how it will be interpreted in the future. Whether he transforms to that view himself is unclear, we're not sure, because actually a lot of the description that he includes there of this Grayson Perrier is not necessarily positive. There's actually quite negative connotations and imagery being created of the urn. But it's interesting then that he leaves it on a positive at the very end, and sort of speculates that, you know, actually art is submissive. Is subjective. So, you know, that idea that artwork, it depends on how you interpret it and your own personal preferences. So it's very interesting there. But also, if we look at structurally, that idea of the complexity as well of the poem that's being created here is maybe reflecting the complexity in creating such a piece of artwork, because we have a very specific rhyme scheme, and that there might, as I said, reflect the complexity of creating the urn, and that idea as well that we've got very set stanzas being used as well and created, again could reflect the effort and energy that goes into creating a vase, which again is a very fixed item, and maybe the fixed structure of the poem can kind of reflect that as well. Thinking about the themes then, so we've got society and culture, that's quite obvious where that's depicted and how that's depicted in this poem, and there's definitely a sort of divide between the social classes as well in this poem, that's being emphasised by the writer, and those sort of cultural references that are very specific to sort of 20th, 21st century living. Identity then, so again that's a common theme that we've looked at, and again links to those cultural references that we've seen in the poem. Past and present, so obviously there was that sort of link to classical Greek artwork, and the link then with the 21st century life, and considering how our society, our artwork, our structures in society, how we live in the 20th and 21st century, how that will translate to future generations, as this writer has kind of emulated Keats in reflecting on a Greek piece of artwork. So really interesting there as well in terms of how that theme is being presented to us in this poem. Finally, you've got some links there to some of the sites that I've had a little look at to inform some of my critical opinions on the poem. Again, if you do need any support with anything, or you have any questions, just drop me a little email or drop me a little comment in our Google Classroom.